this is a parallel. I'm not even going to read it from Tosefta Shabbat. Again, I assume most of the people here know it. So you get a slightly different list of omens. But the question are we talking here about professional omen interpreters, or are we talking about popular knowledge? Do-it-yourself Friday the 13th is not, people would think, is not an ominous day. And here, or it is an ominous day. Here, I'll show you some of these tractates, some of these texts, written manuals in which omens like this are being transmitted in the ancient and medieval world, and of course all over the place in many different languages. So here from the work of Forlani, who published in the 20s and in the 10s, 20s, and the 20s of the 20th century, many small booklets of divination, especially in Syria, a little bit also in Mandek, did very interesting work which is almost entirely ignored today. And here you see, for example, a text about ravens, so knowledge concerning ravens that crow. If a man leaves his home and a raven crows on his right, it is good. He should wait until it rises and then go. And if it did not rise, he should throw a stone at it and make it rise. I always wonder if this guy have any sense of humor, or if it's just me who sees this as funny, but I do see this as funny. But this is what the text says, and if two ravens crow on his right, something good will be said about him. And if a man wishes to go on the road and a raven crows at him from the right, it is good. If a raven crows at him from the left, it is not good. And the text goes on and on. It's not a very long text. And then it moves to similar predictions, similar omens from snakes, from serpents, so knowledge concerning snakes. If the snakes come towards you on the road, you will find what you want. And if two snakes are entwined in the dwelling of a free man or in a pipe, and one of them is unbound, the man will die. And if two snakes are entwined and lying in the market, and a man kills them, he shall have a loss, etc., etc., etc. So you see the very typical structure of these omen lists of prodosis and apodosis. So if X happens, then Y will happen. So X predicts or foretells Y. With X can be anything from any natural phenomenon. It could be, an animal that you saw. It can be a solar eclipse, a lunar eclipse, a thunder in the sky, a twitch in your little finger of the right hand, a twitch in the second finger of the right hand, a twitch in the third finger, a twitch in your nose, a twitch in your right ear, a twitch in your left ear, etc., etc. So twitch divination, very popular, and many other phenomena. And of course, one of the largest corpora and one of the most common types still in use today is dream interpretation. So if in your dream you saw a lion, it means this, and if you saw a tiger, it means that, and if you saw a snake, it means that. And of course it gets ever more complicated, because if you saw a bull in your dream, and here I'm citing from the BABMED, then you know if you saw it, it can have several different meanings, because if the bull butted you, it means one thing, and if you were riding on the bull, it means a second thing, and if you were eating from the bull's flesh, it means a third thing. So the number of possibilities grows larger and larger. Of course, by far the most variegated of these literatures is the oneirocritical literature. That is, omens from dreams are they're much more flexible, much more malleable, and therefore much more numerous. I mean, just think of all the animals you can think about, you can dream about, all the people you can dream about, all the issues you can dream about, all the scenarios. It's of course much larger than, let's say, an eclipse book, where you say, well, if there's an eclipse if there's a lunar eclipse in Iyar, it means this, and if it's in Nisan, it means that, and if it's Sivan, etc., etc., etc. So you're much more limited with that. So we have many books like that in the late Antiquity, of course earlier also, but then in late Antiquity, in the early Middle Ages, and in the Middle Ages, and the Renaissance, and up to today. One of the characteristics of this literature tends to be very technical, very dry, very repetitive, and therefore very hard to memorize. It's a literature that's almost by definition written literature and not oral literature. You can't really just think even of the pages in Babli Brachot that are devoted to dreams and try to memorize them by heart. It's almost impossible, because the things are always the same. It's always, if you dreamt about this, but then the hypothesis will completely change. It's very difficult to memorize even a text like this. And the result is that these texts tend to be written down. Therefore, they're also very easy to translate, so they move very easy from one culture to another, and that's why we have them in 10, 20, 30 different languages, and you keep finding more and more of them in many different languages. Now, you might think that Jews don't do this stuff, because of course, Menachesh, lo yimatzeh b'cha, etc., you're not supposed to do this, and the Sifra, etc., just told us that the Menachesh is exactly someone who does all these things, so Jews are not supposed to do this. But of course they did all the time. I'm showing you just one example. This is a text that is attested at least in 2 manuscripts from the 15th and 17th century, so it's relatively late, but afterwards I'll move to earlier examples. Simanei Orev. It might even be that the choice of the word siman here is deliberate, because of course nachash is bad, but siman is okay, at least in some cases, so maybe this is why this is called simanei orev. But anyway, so simanei orev, the signs of a raven. If you leave your town and you hear the voice of a raven crowing on your right, even if you walk on hot coals, you will not be burned. And if the raven crows on the left side, do not go at all. And if you hear the raven crowing between your shoulders, go back and give alms. So you see sort of the Jewish twist in the text, and the text goes on and on. It's not a very long text. But this just proves to me that, of course, Jews are reading and copying and using these texts. The only question for me, I would never pose the question of, or the assumption, Jews don't do this. The only question for me as a philologist and historian is, where can I prove, or which text can I prove to have been copied and used by Jews in which periods? This is the only question I have, because that they use it is no doubt at all. The question is what is documented. And this is what actually my project is all about. And what I want to do is to ask, where would I find such texts from antiquity? And there are 4 places in which I can find them. One is in Qumran, and here I'm showing you very briefly a part of 4-cube ontologion. You all know this, so if it thunders in Taurus, there will be revolutions against someone, an affliction for the province of Jerusalem, the Dinta, and a sword at the court of the king, and in the province there will be so-and-so, and for the Arabs there will be so-and-so, and then if it thunders in Germany, etc., etc. So you see this clearly, the whole list consisted of 12 zodiac signs, so this is clearly, unfortunately, this is what's been preserved, very little else. But it's very clear that this was the whole manual, and perhaps even other texts afterwards, because these texts tend to travel in clusters. So here you have the text already from Qumran, and of course there are also physiognomic texts from Qumran. I'm not going to show you them here. So Qumran is one place where I find some text, such text. Another place where I find such text is among the pseudepigrapha, and I won't go here into the treatise of Shem on the one hand, and into the Revelatio Estrai on the other, but these are texts that have been included by Charlesworth in his Old Testament pseudepigrapha and are attested now in the Cairo Geniza, so we know that even if they're not Jewish to begin with, they also were used by Jews, and they sort of end up in a very hazy classification of pseudepigrapha, partly because some of them are attributed to various biblical figures, probably partly also to make them more kosher, so Shem wrote it, I don't know if it makes it very kosher, but anyway, they try. So one place is Qumran, another is the pseudepigrapha. Third, of course, the Babylonian Talmud. And I already mentioned the dream book in Babli Brachot. I could mention the Pinax of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi that is cited in Babli Shabbat 156. And there you have this whole discussion of Mazal Yom and Mazal Sha'ah, and it's very, very clear that there you get the whole astrological manual. First, a hemerologion, so one who's born in the day of Sunday, Monday, the day of the sun, the day of the moon, etc., will be like this. And then Rabbi Hanina says, no, it's not Mazal Yom Gorem, it's Mazal Sha'ah, so you should calculate which of the 7 planets, I would say, rules over the hour in the day in which the person was born, and that will determine his fate. And of course, what you do in order to do that is you divide the 24, you take the 7 days of the week and the 24 hours in the day, and you arrange them so that each hour and each day is ruled by one of the 7 planets in an order that is fixed, and it's fixed in a way that the first hour of Sunday will be of the sun, and the first hour of Monday will be of the moon, and the first hour of Tuesday, Mardi, will be of Mars, Ma'adim. So this basically determines the order, and the order is known as Chankal Shatzam. So Chama, Kochav, Noga, Kochav, Levana, it's Shabtai Tzedek Ma'adim, and this is also the order you find in the Talmud. So it's very clear that these guys know what they're talking about. They know these booklets. In the stories of Bar Hedia in Bavli Brachot, they also mention that Bar Hedia drops his book, so they know that these guys have manuals. Of course, one thing I'm not going to go into here, but I'm fully aware of, the rabbis have their own way of subverting this literature. Because when Bar Hedia drops his books, they open them and they see that it says Kol HaChalomot Olchim Achar HaPeh, which means it's only the interpreter who basically determines everything. If there's one thing I'm willing to swear to you is that Bar Hedia, if he was a professional dream interpreter, this was not in his book. This is not a sentence from his book. His book looked like what you get elsewhere in the Sugya, Haroeh Pil B'Chalom, Haroeh Karnaf B'Chalom, whatever, Kof B'Chalom, etc. So this, certainly, he had probably dozens of pages of that, but not this very rabbinic dictum that Kol HaChalomot Olchim Achar HaPeh, and this is something that I see the rabbis doing everywhere, and I'm not going to talk about this here because here I'm interested in the divinatory, in the manuals of divination, and not in what the rabbis do with them. All I want to do is to show that the rabbis too are familiar with them. And then I come, so I have the Qumran materials, I have the pseudepigrapha, I have rabbinic literature, and by far the most prolific source for the study of these texts is the Cairo Geniza. And here I want to show you some examples, and I want to show you how I work with these materials and what I'm trying to do. Of course, the biggest problem with the Geniza materials is that the Geniza, by definition,